Hey friends, thanks for joining in another short talk as the Emerging Grace SF community this summer. We're continuing to look at the very early Jesus community's encounters with the Holy Spirit in the book of Acts. And there's a scene right at the beginning of the book of Acts where Jesus is saying goodbye. He's saying goodbye to his closest followers. He's leaving them to return to God in heaven. But before he goes, he says, look, for now, I want you to stay in Jerusalem. I want you to stay there until the Holy Spirit comes and empowers you. And then when that happens, then you will go out to be my witnesses, not only in Jerusalem, but you'll go out to the regions of Judea and Samaria, and you'll go out to all the ends of the earth. And so the disciples, they waited. They did it. They waited in Jerusalem, and soon the Holy Spirit came and it empowered them. And we talked about that some in the last video. But then they stayed. They stayed in Jerusalem for a while at least. And the Jesus movement, it grew and it became both really popular and controversial. And there were challenges, but they stayed right there in Jerusalem until a fierce wave of persecution set in on them. And the real breaking point was the stoning, the mob murder of Stephen, an early church leader who dared to suggest that God could not be contained in the Jerusalem temple because the whole cosmos was God's temple and you can't contain God in a single building. But challenging the temple system was the one thing you just could not do in Jerusalem at the time. And it incited a mob to stone Stephen. And then after that, a horrible wave of persecution set in. It was led by this guy, Saul of Tarsus, who later becomes the Apostle Paul. But at this point, Saul of Tarsus is just arresting and throwing in prison every Jesus follower he can find. And so then we read in Acts 8, and all except the apostles, all except the 12 apostles, were scattered. They were scattered throughout the countryside of Judea and Samaria. Now those who were scattered went from place to place, proclaiming the word, proclaiming the story of Jesus. And Philip went down to Samaria and proclaimed the Messiah to them. Philip went down to Samaria and proclaimed the Messiah to them. So it took a fierce and intensely violent persecution to scatter the disciples out of Jerusalem. But what's really interesting is if you probe into that word scattered a bit, and if you look at it in the original language, in the original Greek, it presents, as words often do, some clear imagery. There's clear imagery behind it, and it's the imagery of a seed, or of lots of seed, being scattered, being sown, being thrown out, but like thrown out to be planted for new growth. Seed being scattered, being sown. That's the image right there in that word scattered in the Greek. And I'm sure that the disciples never thought, I've got to believe they never actually thought Jesus meant they would be violently scattered out of Jerusalem. Not like this, but it took an unexpected, an undesired, a deeply traumatizing persecution to scatter them out from the known, comfortable territory of Jerusalem and into all these new places they never imagined going. Places like Samaria, where Philip goes. And Samaria wasn't far away at all geographically, but it was like light years away psychologically and religiously, because good Jews never went to Samaria, because the Samaritans, who were actually like their long-lost cousins, they were viewed as total betrayers of the family, as breakers of the law for intermarrying with all the surrounding nations. And it was a rift that had gone back like 900 years and built and built and deepened and grown on a level that we just would have a really hard time understanding. But Philip, even though good Jews would never go to Samaria purposely, Philip, guided by the Holy Spirit and scattered out of Jerusalem through that persecution, goes straight to Samaria. He goes straight there and he tells them the story of Jesus. And in hearing that story of Jesus, the Samaritans actually find fulfillment of their own longing and fulfillment of their own wait for a Messiah, because their own scriptures and their own prophecies had promised that a Messiah would come. They called him the Tahib, the one who would explain everything, the one who would answer their deepest questions and their deepest longings. And when they realized that this Jesus that Philip was talking about was their Tahib, their Messiah, all kinds of supernatural things began to take place. And after all that, in Acts 8, it says, this is kind of like the conclusion of that story. It says, there was great joy in that city. Great joy through the story of Jesus delivered by Philip, who had crossed an unimaginable psychological boundary because of an unwanted and an undesired, a violent persecution in Jerusalem that scattered the early Jesus followers, but also planted them and planted the story of Jesus in new places and for new growth. And you know, there seems to be something about living an authentic spiritual life, something intrinsic to living an authentic spiritual life, that where you're guided by the Spirit, that will take us continually outside of our comfort zones, outside of the realm of the predictable and the known, outside of the cozy nests that we continually try to build for ourselves, because that's what we do. And Richard Rohr on this says something really interesting. He says, setting out is always a leap of faith, a risk in the deepest sense of the term, and yet an adventure too. The familiar and the habitual are so falsely reassuring, and most of us make our homes there permanently. The new is always, by definition, unfamiliar and untested, so God, life, destiny, suffering have to give us a push, usually a big one, or we will not go. We just won't go if there's not a push. And look, I really do know that being scattered, being sent into the unknown usually feels overwhelming and unwanted, at least for a while, until we can see that we're actually being planted for new growth, but that often takes a while. And perhaps right now you're facing a new and unexpected challenge in your life. Maybe you're being scattered into new territory that you didn't see coming. But you know, the Spirit, the same Spirit that sends us out, also goes with us on the journey too. The Spirit goes with us. And it reminded me of one of my all-time favorite Rilke poems. Maybe it's one you're familiar with as well, where Rilke says, God speaks to each of us as he makes us, then walks with us silently out of the night. These are the words we dimly hear. You, sent out beyond your recall, go to the limits of your longing. Embody me. Flare up like a flame and make big shadows I can move in. Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. Don't let yourself lose me. Nearby is the country they call life. You will know it by its seriousness. Give me your hand. Give me your hand. And I like to think that Philip and the others who were scattered out of Jerusalem had a clear sense that the Spirit was going with them too, that there would be beauty and terror, but that God was leading them by the hand, and that their role, like our role, honestly, is to make big shadows God can move in. Big shadows God can move in. So for whatever unexpected journey you're finding yourself on right now, and in whatever ways you feel like you're being scattered like seeds, may you also feel God's hand leading you. May you anticipate the new country they call life with new growth and new joy that lies just ahead. So go in peace this week, friends. Amen.